people may use different terminology, or they may have different frameworks of experience, but basically they're beginning to resonate with the same things. God's drawing people into a deeper revelation of, you know, him, and the sort of supernatural spiritual realms. I mean, you know, people have different experiences of it. I think some people are still at the stage where their experiences are involuntary and, you know, ecstatic rather than by choice, but that's changing, I think, as people begin to realize that you can learn how to do these things, that we have to train our senses to be able to discern things. And if people are willing to put in the practice and discipline, then they can reap the rewards of it. But it is interesting just to connect up with different people's stories and journeys around the world in different ways, and see that God is just releasing this sound out of heaven, and that sound is wooing people and drawing people, and deep's calling out to deep. So yeah, it's good, always good to meet people on the same journey. So
Recently heard some people who have never, I don't think they've ever heard of this ministry, but they have been hearing a three-tone sound and singing a blue light, which I've read on Facebook, and they've never heard of Mike Parsons or anything like that. And,
well, they don't need to hear about me to experience something that God's doing. You know, a lot of what I'm doing is just facilitating, and it doesn't really matter whether people get to know me or not. Some people on their journey may come from different sources or engage different things, but you know, it shows that a lot of what we do when we engage the supernatural realms and do things from that perspective have a wider impact than we can imagine or think. And you know, whenever I've released sounds, you know, released lights and things, you know, they're still out there. I mean, that is still vibrating out there in the atmospheres that eventually people can connect to. And even if they never ever know me, they'll find that God will unveil things to them through those experiences, you know, which is, for me, you know, the key. You know, the key is everyone gets on their own journey of engagement with God and finds who they are and their identity as sons, you know, in it. So it's all good. Yeah. So, anyone got any questions and things you want to talk about today?
Can I ask? Oh, is there any? Are you okay? Can you hear me play?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have an echo. Anyway, that's better. Just wanted to say I've listened recently to Chris Blackby. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, he's one of the guys who heads up Seraph Publishing, Creative Publishing, who's published some of Ian Clayton's books and Justin Abraham's books and others. So yeah, no, I've heard of it. Yeah.
It was very interesting to listen to. Really enjoy that. We watch it as a little ecclesia with Ross Dunlop, and it's going even further, saying, you know, we are sons of God. So, you know, we are in perfect health. We don't have generational issue. I like the concept of going further, pushing further, and going with God and being with God, and, you know, remembering who we are all the time. So I did enjoy that. You're mute, Mike.
Yeah. What ways would you say it goes further?
In the way it says, you know, forget the. You should aim to go directly for a relationship with God, and everything comes from the relationship with God. So we shouldn't have to go to court and do all these things and intercession or court case, etc. We should, you know, it's quite interesting. He says he's not there yet, neither. So he's trying, but he said we shouldn't have headaches. Oops. Christine, I think you should mute. Yeah, thank you. He says, you know, we shouldn't have headaches, but he's still taking tablets for headaches, but he's trying to to get his healing directly from God. It's quite interesting. It's, you know, it's taking everything and he's having a bit of his own, but he speaks of the 3 levels. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And so the basic, the church as it is now, where you don't achieve much. And then there's the evangelic church, and you go to court and you do all these things. And there's the level which is in heaven, and you have to access this level. So yes, hard work, practicing, believing, trusting, but interesting.
Yeah, and that's where everything starts in relationship, and that works through relationship. Obviously, people have got their own journeys and their own way of describing things. Ultimately, yeah, we want to make sure everything stays relational, and it flows out of that relationship with God and being engaged in his heart and knowing him from that intimate place. Yeah, but there are, you know, the angelic realms, and there are the realms of heaven that different things happen, and which you need to understand and learn from. You know, God has established his kingdom and all the realms of the heavenly realms to outwork his kingdom as we flow out of relationship with him. So yeah, if we're going to be fully functioning sons of God, then it will be a change in how we think, how we feel about who we are, our identity as sons, and therefore living in the fullness of that, which means living in health and wholeness. You know, there's no end to the increase of his government and peace. So peace is the shalom, wholeness, you know, in every way. So not being fractured, not being separated, being integrated, spirit, soul, body, completely together, all that stuff functions, and living in dual realms. You know, I think that's ultimately where people need to be, you know, not going into heaven and coming back out of heaven and stepping in and stepping out. That's a good place to start, but actually living there. And once then you fully realize the capacity that we have as sons to be multi-dimensional, then you're not limited to 2 realms either. It can be multiple places at the same time, but you have to have your mind renewed. You know, the biggest limitations that we face are how we think. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And our thinking won't ever change without encounter with God. You can't change by trying to change. You can't change your thinking by trying to focus on things that you need to think differently about. We need encounters. We need to experience God, and that will change our thinking. And we then align our thinking out of our experience with God, not out of our understanding of him or our theology about him or what the Bible says about him or anything else. It must come from personal experience. Otherwise, it's just someone else's opinion that we're trying to follow. And it's great. Everyone testifying and giving testimonies of what they do and how they do it, which is all good. But ultimately, we have to find how we do it. You know, each of us individually has to have a personal, individual relationship with God. We're not clones. You know, we're not designed to be the same. Every snowflake is different. Every human being, starting out as a living being, a spirit being, you know, that we're all different, you know, and designed to be different. So I think it can be helpful to have testimonies, but we need to get our own testimony. You know?
Yeah, yes, I find very interesting because I've always done all the activation and my time with God in meditation, in total peace and quiet. And God has taken me, because for me it's easier, first of all, and it's the respect of, you know, what I'm doing. And then God is taking me to do it while I'm doing my chores. So, or when I get ready in the morning, he said, why taking 2 times? You know, you spend time with me, but you spend time doing all the things in the house. Join the 2. You do something in the natural, do something else in the supernatural. So I'm practicing at the moment, doing the activations, you know, and doing lots of things while I'm doing my normal life. And I thought it was not respectful. And God is saying, no, that's the idea. It's doing both at the same time. So I love it.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's why, you know, in some of the engaging God exercises, it's about learning to do 2 things at the same time: praying in tongues and reading the Bible. Praying in tongues while speaking, all sorts of different things like that, because we have to learn how to be able to be non-local, non-linear in our thinking, so that we're not separating everything up, you know, that we can be multitasking, multifunctioning, our spirit and soul engaging at the same time, and just taking little steps of learning how to do that here will eventually break down some of the barriers of how we do that in the realms of heaven. And once you can function from a multi-dimensional level, then you don't have to be conscious of doing all those things. You know, if my spirit at the moment is in 6 or 7 different places doing 6 or 7 different things, I don't need to be consciously aware of it. I just need to be doing it, and I can flow from it. You know, when I was functioning in one realm, then I was going in heaven, stepping back out of heaven, trying to do what I saw there in this realm. When I was living in dual realms, I was stepping in heaven. My spirit stayed there. My soul would engage my spirit, and then my soul would disengage and come into this realm, and my spirit continues. So my spirit then becomes a entangled quantumly with my soul and flowing from that place. Then once you're then able to operate in multiple realms, then you have multiple streams all flowing at the same time. And you don't have to be consciously trying to think about what I'm doing there, because my spirit doesn't need my consciousness, you know, in terms of my soul, to either understand or agree. It just needs to function together as a unified being, if you like, but living in different dimensions and different places. Now it takes time to do that, and you do need your mind to be renewed and deconstructed to free your consciousness into having the mind of Christ. I mean, the Bible says we have the mind of Christ. Well, do we think the mind of Christ functions in a limited capacity, believing lies? No. You know, the mind of Christ operates in the true reality, the true truth, which is another word for reality. So our minds can create reality in relationship to him, not limited by our memory of what we do here. But that takes some work to be able to come into that through relationship. But it's there, it's possible. You know,
don't you think that, do we need to activate our spirit? I have a sense that my spirit, whatever I do with my soul, my spirit is busy in heaven doing things. Do you think I'm right? Or do I need to really tell my spirit what to do or start an activation? I have the feeling he's already there, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, if your spirit is engaged in that realm and you don't shift in and out of that realm, then yeah. But what you have to be is connected to that realm from this realm, so that what happens flows into you and through you, maybe in giving you revelation, insight, discernment, flowing in what you say without having to think about it or prepare, just it flows out of heaven into this realm, saying things that you don't know, because your spirit is already prepared and does know from its engagement with God. Now, it's good sometimes to engage soul and spirit. You know, if I'm going to go to a court in the realms of heaven and I'm going to make a law, and then I'm going to share that law with others, and I need to go with my soul as well as my spirit to begin to cognitively discern what I'm doing. If I'm doing something which doesn't need to be taught others or shared with others, then it doesn't matter whether I cognitively are aware of it or not. You know, and I think that's the, you know, the key to some of these things is to just flow. You know, now I can shift my consciousness from here to there and be aware of what I'm doing there when I choose. You know, and I only do that when I feel led to do it. My spirit leads, my soul follows. And my soul resonates with what my spirit is doing, because my spirit is connected to a higher frequency or a higher speed of light. So I vibrate at a frequency that then my soul here connects to and comes into agreement with or resonates with. Now, I don't have to consciously do any of that, but I did have to learn how to do it when I started. Now that's just how I live. But to activate your spirit, when your spirit is sort of challenged by the soul with this sort of soul spirit test of tension, you know, which it's, you know, the soul, you know, against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh or whatever, then you have to get to the point where your soul gives up and surrenders so that your spirit leads, you know, and then it's just you. I don't think of myself as spirit, soul, body. I just think of myself as me, a son of God, who, you know, my spirit is functioning, my soul is functioning, my body's functioning. It's me, but I'm living in different dimensions. Now, you know, I couldn't do that to start with. You know, it becomes something that then, if you can't consciously engage it at all, then you have to be, okay, well, do I actually know what my spirit's doing at any point in time? Can I know what my spirit's doing? Because we are supposed to be able to interact with it, not just assume or hope for the best. So it would be great just to think, well, my spirit's doing things, but actually, is it? And I think if you can't engage with your soul, then you won't ever really know whether your spirit's doing something or not. So it's important to be able to engage cognitively, but not all the time. You don't need to. You know, now most of what I do is not cognitive until I choose to. But when I do choose to, I can become very aware of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. You know, so that therefore it becomes a supernatural lifestyle that that's who you are. You know, we are sons of God. We have an identity and a destiny to fulfill as sons, both in the realms of heaven, but also as a gateway of heaven into the earth. And if we're just doing spiritual things and they don't have any earthly impact, then I don't think that also is the answer. We need to be out working and earthing out what our spirit is doing. So extending our boundaries of our spirit here in this realm, so that what I'm doing in the realms of heaven actually flows out and extends. You know, so extending our tent peg. Think of our spirit as a tent, and I'm extending the tent peg, the cords, so that my consciousness, the rivers of living water, the frequency can fill that space. You know, it can start in me, and then Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. It's got to be expanding outwards. And that becomes something which we have to cooperate with, agree with, engage with. You know, it won't just happen until we choose it to happen, because we have to say yes. We have to agree and engage it. You know, if I don't extend my spiritual boundaries, then they'll still be limited to me within my physical body. You know, my spirit has to expand to encompass my soul and my mountains and my governmental spheres, so that then I have a capacity to be able to engage with those realms spiritually and also cognitively when necessary. So it's, you know, it's a journey, it's a lifestyle that we grow in, you know, and learning to do things in two places, or learning to do things, you know, in everyday life is part of that process, so that you become, you know, centered on the spiritual aspect of life that then feeds into everything else. But, yeah.
Yes, and the very interesting thing in doing what you said is, you know, I've been explaining before that I feel very frustrated. I don't have this amazing experience everybody is sharing, but I have a lot of time, you know, huggings and kissings and spending just time just being there with God and Jesus and other people. And then I was hanging out with Wisdom just a few days ago, and she suddenly told me that I don't need to have this amazing experience, because the fact that I am with them I'm like a sponge. I receive what's happening, and that's why I'm changing so much, and everything is changing around me also, is that I don't have amazing revelation and I don't have amazing experience, but because I spend so much time with them, I absorb who they are and their purity and different things which affect my soul, my body, and then my environment and my mountains here. And I was wondering, you know, so much good thing is happening in the atmosphere, in, you know, there are so many changes in my life. It's fantastic. And I didn't understand how it links. So that's what she says. And that was a revelation for me. And suddenly I realized, okay, I understand. And for all those who find it difficult, you know, it's such an encouragement to know we don't need to do anything or having amazing experience. We just absorb as long as we spend time there. And for me, that's absolutely amazing. It was just an amazing revelation.
Sure. I mean, you are having amazing revelations and experiences just in the spirit and not with the soul. You know, you are encountering, your spirit is engaging. It's just your soul has not connected to that in a cognitive way. And I think you can do both. You know, most of what I do is in the spirit and in that spiritual realm, which isn't cognitive. But sometimes it's really good to actually be able to converse with God, and he tells you this, this, and this, so that you do understand it. And then when someone says something to you, you can say, hey, yeah, God spoke to me about that this week, or shared that and showed me that. And sometimes that can come from a cognitive, I remember that God said that, or my spirit can remember and flow that through me without me knowing. Then I'll know after I've said, you know. So when my spirit has released the revelation, that I get to actually cognitively experience it because I've heard myself say it, you know. And that happens a lot. You know, I say a lot of things that I don't actually know until I say it, you know, which comes from that place of intimacy where we do absorb, where we do live in that place, spirit, soul, and body, you know. But it's a journey. Everyone has different ways, you know, and there's no one right way, you know, at all, which is why we have to find it for ourselves. Okie dokie. Okay, anyone else got anything you want to talk about or share?
Mike, I wonder if you're familiar with Joseph Sturgeon has a very interesting diagram. Let's see, operating from the seat of rest.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. It's the flow from the seat of rest to the mind of Christ to brain. So you were saying that we were still trying to operate in faith, for example, healing. We're still looking for faith healing instead of operating out of the seat of rest. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the first things Jesus taught me in the realms of heaven as an exposition of a passage of scripture was Matthew 11:28-30, coming from rest, you know. And if I do not surrender that seat of rest to God, to the Father, then I'm going to be trying to create that out of my own strength. So for me, every day I surrender the seat of rest to the Father, and then he can father me. I'm in him, so he's teaching me to flow out of that place, that seat of rest, as I surrender to him. You know, I surrender that government to him, and then he's teaching me as a son to flow out of it. So for me, everything has to flow out of that place, because that is the place where the throne of God is in me, as well as being the throne of God that I can occupy in the realms of heaven. And that's why both of them have to work together. You know, if I'm just trying to operate from an earthly perspective without actually having the heavenly perspective, then I'm going to be limited to how I do that. So I need to be in both realms. You know, as God is on the throne of my life and I'm in him, heaven recognizes that I am seated there and operating there. So I establish things in the heavens so they can be outworked on the earth from relationship and from rest. You know, that to me then flows out into everything through my life that flows out from the inside out, not the outside in, which is for me where rest comes from, you know. And rest also is connected to our identity, knowing who we are, not striving to be something, not striving to do something to be someone, but knowing who we are in relationship. That's what really rest is. Because Jesus taught me, says, all who are weary and heavy laden, come to me and find rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. You know, and what he said is, learn from me because I'm gentle and humble in heart. And that to me is the absolute key element of rest. I need to know who I am, and I need to be completely surrendered in relationship to him and no independence. If I'm operating independently, then I'm not at rest. So everything has to flow out of relational rest. Then it's flowing out of who I am, you know, and the more I know who I am, the more there's a flow. And that's what I've found in everything I do. You know, I just want to flow out of a place of rest, which means I don't need to strive. I don't need to be in fear. I don't need to try. I don't need to try and make something happen. I just have to be me in relationship with God, the Father, so I can be a son. And then everything flows out of that sonship. And they're all really describing the same thing. You know, my identity, my sonship, being at rest, they're all really a description of me living in an intimacy with God and flowing out of that place. You know, people have different ways of describing it, different diagrams that they draw, which essentially just gives a flavor of their own personal perspective on it, which is really helpful. And some people relate to one thing and some people relate to another thing, you know. Ian Clayton would talk about it as the gateways of spirit, soul, and body, with first love, you know, being the place of rest. When I'm in the relationship of first love, in that intimacy with the Father, then my sonship will flow out of that place. I think people just use different descriptions, I think, of something which is very similar, perhaps with a little bit of revelation that someone else didn't have. And when you put it all together, you get the bigger picture of it all. Because I don't think anyone's got all the revelation, otherwise would need each other. You know, I think God gives it deliberately, bit by bit, so that we can learn from each other and learn to operate in relational ways with each other as well as with God. You know, so, yeah.
You know, I myself reverting to trying to work up faith or operate from the gift of faith rather than doing nothing and sitting back and
yeah. Well, in a sense, God does nothing unless it's through faith. I mean, you know, without faith, it's impossible to please God. But it isn't our faith. I live by the faith of the Son of God. So my trust is in him. So I don't try and have to drum up faith. You know, Jesus said, well, if you have faith as a mustard seed, well, the mustard seed and the tree, you know, it wasn't really saying we only need a little bit of faith. It's like we just need his faith and everything will flow out of that. You know, and I don't need to try and do anything to drum up anything because I'm in relationship. Rest is I only have to do what I see the Father doing. We do these things together. We walk together in relationship. Therefore, if he's showing me something, the resources to be able to do that flows out of him. You know, the life, the river of life, the fullness of the very essence of who he is flows, you know, out of a relational connection, not a institutional one or you know, a mechanical one. It's a organic relationship, and that seat of rest is my relationship. I mean, that's what it really is. I'm in a place of total rest and peace, completely trusting in him, therefore not having to worry, concern, be anxious, fearful of anything, whatever it might be. And therefore, if I see someone who's sick and I don't have a mandate or I'm not seeing that that's what the Father's doing with me, I don't have to go and pray for them. And I don't have to feel guilty in any way that I haven't. And some people can ask me, have asked me, will you do this? And I say, well, no, I can't do that because I don't have the permission to do it. And Jesus did that. Jesus said to his mother, you know, this is my time. But then a few seconds later, it was his time. So he had this relationship where God could change something in the flow of that relationship, where Jesus was able to say no, and then Jesus was able to say yes straight away, because it's a living relationship. It's not fixed, you know, because a relationship which is based on a list of do's and don'ts is just legalistic. So, you know, Jesus didn't get in the morning a whole list of what he could and couldn't do that day. He just had the heart of God and a desire to fulfill the heart of God. And therefore, he was able to connect with the heart of God and say no. And then he was able to connect with the heart of God and say yes, because the heart of God towards the person changed his heart, you know, and there's a lot of that which comes out of relationship, you know. But it all flows, you know. If it isn't flowing and we're trying to create faith to do something, then I would suggest that God never asked us to do it in the first place, you know, because, you know, and when he does ask us to do something, or we do get a feeling we have a mandate, the results of what we do are not our responsibility either. Because some people say, well, why didn't that work? Or why didn't that happen? I never second guess God. It's like, I'm not gonna, if he asks me to do something and I do it, that's all I need to do. Whatever happens as a result of me doing that is his business and not mine, you know, which is why I don't need to know a lot of the things I'm doing or the results of them, you know, unless God wants to show me. And if he does show me, then it's great. And I can say, yeah, that's brilliant to see some of the things that I do, and you can see some of the results. But if I didn't, it wouldn't make any difference to me, because all I want to do is what he says and what he shows, not, you know, that when that gives a result, I'm going to feel better about myself. So I pray for someone to get healed, and they get healed, and I feel better about myself than if I prayed for someone to be healed and they weren't healed. It makes no difference to me of how I feel about myself, because the results is not my business. That's God's. I just have to be the channel for whatever God wants to do. And sometimes that's to actually teach me something, and sometimes that's to do something else. But it all flows relationally anyway. But it does mean you are so much freer, you know. So, yeah.
Hi, my
Hi, Agnes.
Did you have a good time?
I had a great time, thank you. Yeah, it was really good.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to ask, do you know anything about Methuselah other than what's mentioned in the Bible?
Methuselah?
Yes.
Well, other than him being one of you know, Noah's ancestors, and obviously was the oldest man in terms of time, of age, although Adam was essentially the oldest man, but he didn't have most of his life in time. So he had a lot of stuff outside of time. But in a sense, Methuselah was the oldest man because God gave the period of time that Methuselah was alive for people to turn to him. And when Methuselah died, it then released the God to bring the flood. So there was a connection between the length of Methuselah's life in giving people an opportunity to turn away from where they were going, you know, but ultimately it just got worse because people didn't listen, and effectively they became more and more, you know, wrong in their thinking. I mean, it's a terrible description, Genesis 6. You know, their whole mindset was violent and continually. You know, it was a terrible place because a lot of them weren't, you know, functioning out of relationship with God at all. So, but as a person, in terms of one of the cloud of witnesses, I've never met Methuselah personally, no, but I'm sure others have, and maybe if you've got a desire, or maybe you've met him, go and ask him. Does he have a function in heaven, and what is it, and does he have a function in terms of seasons or times or not? I mean, it'd be interesting to find out. So have you why do you ask?
Now, because I was just communing about yesterday by one, and I just sensed his name. And so I was like, okay, so I'm kind of like trying to dig what the relationship is, what his role is in the earth as of now, and particularly in my own life. So yeah, I'm really excited.
I mean, essentially, we have all sorts of connections with different men in white linen or cloud of witnesses that may have a particular meaning for us. Certainly I've not really come across Methuselah, but I've engaged Enoch and others because they have a connection to me and what I guess my destiny is, which is great. That's why it's, again, individual, that we have these assigned to our lives and they recognize some of the things and network some of those things with us. So yeah. But if you ever want to go meet him, go to the court of the upright and ask to meet him. See what he says. You can go to the court of to the record room and drink the wine of his life and find out things that way. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways of engaging with history, what's happened. Go on the timeline and go back and meet him. There's all sorts of different ways. Whatever you're mandated to do, then go and engage it.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else got anything?
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
The Lord has been talking to me a lot about polarity in the last several months. Well, I think yesterday it kind of simplified for me. What I understood was I needed to disengage or break out of the system of the whole tree of good and evil, assessing things based on good and bad. And I don't know, I'm finding that very difficult in some areas. I find myself in a situation where, someone is doing something wrong and you speak to them and you love them and you call out of them who they are in Christ, and you keep doing that, but the person doesn't stop doing what's wrong. And my question, which I'm asking the Lord, and I guess I'm asking you now, is what do you do in such a situation, especially when whatever they're doing is causing you pain?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting scenario. In essence, we're not to flow out of that DIY system of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is essentially a humanistic view. It's the way that seems right to us. It's leaning to our own understanding. Proverbs 3:5, don't lean to your own understanding. All those things come about us making a view drawn from our experience and everything else. We need to see and engage people's hearts, not the outside. And when I engage this, if it's affecting me negatively, then I just keep a heart of love. I choose to forgive, release people, bless people, even if they are doing negative things or doing things to hurt me. My responsibility is to make sure my heart's right towards them. I can't change them. It's like you can't change anybody. You can't make anyone change. There are things you can do from a governmental position in the realms of heaven, in the courts of heaven, to create environments that people can respond to change. But ultimately, does God love me unconditionally or not? So would he love me any more if I was better or worse? The answer is no, because he is love, he loves me. Do I feel his love? That changes in terms of how I am, but he doesn't change. So if I'm going to operate in the love of God, then I need to love people unconditionally. That means wanting the best for them, but also respecting their free will. God respects our free will. So we have to respect other people's free will, which means we don't try and change them. We need to love them. And in that loving them and releasing them into the hands of God, trust that God will begin to change and transform people's lives because they know that they're loved. Conditional love isn't really love at all, because it has an agenda. And if my agenda is to see someone change because it actually affects me in a positive way, then that's not a good motivation. I need to have the motivation to love for love's sake, not because I'm going to get something out of it. God doesn't love us to get something out of it.
Come on.
He loves us because he loves us. And if we love people that way, because Jesus said, love people the way I've loved you. If we do that, I believe people will respond to that sense of love. But if we're presenting God to people who is the judge, who is judgmental, who only loves them when they sort of maintain a sort of standard of behavior, which is the law, then the law just brings death. But Jesus came to abolish death, to abolish the law, and to sum up the law in love. So the whole law is now summed up in love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I think you can bless a person, call out their destiny, but you can't do anything to change them. Otherwise, you're putting something conditional on the relationship. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to, be happy about being mistreated, but there's a difference between choosing to forgive someone for their behavior and holding on to it. And, I would encourage you in those situations to just keep demonstrating love and make sure that you do have love. I know in the past I've looked at situations and people and I didn't have love, even though I thought I did, because I couldn't truly bless them, because I'd never really truly released them from what they were doing. I still wanted them to say sorry, or them to own up to what they've done, and that again is what we think that God wants from people. He will only forgive them if they repent. That isn't true. Repentance is a total radical shift of thinking, which is nothing to do with receiving forgiveness. God forgives everyone because of what Jesus did on the cross, not because we deserve it or that we've made amends or penance to make him forgive us because now we deserve forgiveness. And essentially it's unconditional on the basis of our relationship. So we need to learn to treat people the same way God treats us. And it's very, very hard because the flesh is not used to doing that. But as our spirit leads, then we can become much better at loving people, forgiving people, blessing people, wanting the best for people, and not trying to change them. Because if I try and change them, what am I trying to change them into? Something that's going to be something I think is going to be better, which may not be where God is at with that person at this point in their journey. And we have to respect that there is a journey that people are on. When I engage people who don't really know God or don't really know Jesus, then I want to try and help them see the light that God has placed within them and the destiny that he's given them, and help them discover a relationship with God who is already engaged with them. They just don't know it. That is never going to come through this legalistic way of viewing people, the world, or religious legalistic ways of dealing with people. And that's the problem with the church and the institution. It operates through legalism and the law. It expects behavior to change before relationship. You know, behavior changes from relationship, not for relationship. And that's how God treats us. And it's the way I think he wants us to treat others. You know, and we've got so much to learn in the whole area. People get saved, they find a relationship with God, and immediately they get connected with a church. The church wants them to change. They want them to change their behavior to fit in. And, you know, and therefore they put pressure on people to change their behavior, try and conform, and it puts people under bondage. It's like it's God's responsibility to bring the Spirit to bear on someone's conscience, to begin to change. You know, it's not my responsibility to change anybody or to try and make them change. And when we do that in a religious system, it just is control. You know, and I've seen so many people damaged because someone told them they needed to stop doing this or to stop doing that, because it was that person's personal opinion. And, you know, I always remember we had people connected with the martial arts, and they became Christians, and people immediately were telling them that all that they were doing was wrong, that it was based in wrong things, and therefore they should stop. And God actually wanted to continue using those people in the circle of relationships they had, because they had an open avenue to engage those people with the positive testimony of God, you know, and the church just wanted to take them out of those positions rather than help them in it. You know, and we had a guy who actually is part of one of our bench of threes here. You know, he was a martial arts tutor and trainer. And when he became a Christian, I remember someone here tried to give him a book on all the dangers of martial arts. And I just told him to throw it away. You know, because God will show him if he didn't want him to do anything or does want him to do anything. And he continued in teaching his martial arts classes for a couple of years. And then God said, no, it's time to move on and stop that. And therefore he did it because God said, not because someone else thought that was the right thing to do. And we do have a lot of Christian people who, you know, think they're doing good, but actually they're not really, when they're trying to be God to people. God can talk to someone and tell them, you know. But it's not easy, particularly when it affects you negatively. And I can only, you know, share my own experiences with my own children and things where, you know, I've wanted them desperately to have a relationship with God, and the fact that they weren't necessarily walking with God in the way that I'd hoped at that point in their lives frustrated me, and effectively, you know, therefore their lifestyles and the things that they might have been doing would have had a negative influence, you know. But I had to continue loving them, and the more you continue loving them, the more likely it is that they will find that God is love, you know. And eventually, you know, with our children, you know, they're all on their own journeys with God. But when you hand them over to God and don't carry the responsibility yourself, then you have to trust that God will do what he needs to do. Sometimes through us and sometimes not through us. You know, and I can remember my youngest daughter once saying, oh, you know, I want you to pray for me, you know, because I want to engage these things. And I'm like, to God, do I have mandate to pray for it? No. So I didn't. And then, you know, a while later, will you pray for me? No. You know, I didn't say no. I just thought, no, I'm just going to wait, you know, because, you know, God has not given me a mandate to pray for you at this point in time. And eventually, you know, she came back again and says, look, I really, really, and God said, yeah. You know, so again, times, seasons, timings of things are really important to make sure we're not stepping outside of what God is giving us a mandate to do and doing it because we think it's a good idea, or even our compassion is moving us to go beyond the boundary of what we're permitted to do in God. You know, and that's a dangerous thing, and particularly when it comes to our own children and things, you know, because I would have, you know, desperately wanted to see something happen, but I would have been you know, out of the right timing for that. And so, yeah.
Mike, can I add something there from my own experience?
Yeah, sure.
We are taught all the time that we need to preserve and protect the relationship and love and make the other pass before you, etc. I just want to share one thing. I had major problem with my son, and one day God said, "It's finished. Leave him alone. You know, don't have a relationship with him. He's not going to change now. He will change in the future. But you protect yourself. You leave him doing his life, and you just, you know, pray for him or bless him every day, but do not have a relationship with him." So just emphasizing that it's not wrong, you know, tree of life or tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is not wrong to break a relationship because it's detrimental. I thought that I was doing the best, trying and having a relationship, and that was wrong. And God says, stop it. You're only damaging yourself. I'm not asking you to have a relationship with him.
Yeah, and there's a difference between relationship in that I don't want a relationship because I'm angry, frustrated, and that I'm leaving this person to, you know, hand them to God in that sense. Because that's a very different thing. It means you still have a relationship with them from you love them, but you're not actually walking that relationship out by actually physically engaging with them. And you know, there are times when you have to do that. God does that with us. You know, over and over it says he hands us over, he turns his face from, or he hides his face from, because he's wanting us to see the consequences of not walking with him. You know, and sometimes those consequences are not pleasant. You know, and does that mean that God brought those negative things on that person? No, it just means that their consequences of what their own choices were allowed to affect them. And sometimes as parents and in relationships, we try and protect too much, and we try and compensate or all those type of things when, you know, and we enable and we, you know, do all those things because we love them, but they're not always the best things at all. Because sometimes, you know, we have to, as you say, allow them to live with their own choices and realize that those choices weren't so good after all, you know, because we know following the DIY path and that DIY tree ultimately is going to produce nothing which is good. You know, it is going to produce death. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the ends are the ways of death. So it's never going to produce life. And sometimes people just have to find that out for themselves. You know, but the more we enable, the longer it takes for them to find out. You know, but you have to do whatever God says. In another situation, God might say something totally different to a person. That's why it's a relationship, and that's why we only have to do what the Father shows us, not what the Father shows anyone else. But there are so many different ways that he can actually do that and outwork that. You know, but consequences is one. You know, if we shelter people from consequences, then actually sometimes we're stopping what God is doing in their lives. Yeah. So.
Yes, and the amazing thing is because I was obedient to God, it didn't break my heart. I don't miss him. It's just amazing how I can still love him really with the same love and being happy with myself and not missing him. And that's from God only.
Absolutely, because then you're not going to feel guilty or ashamed or condemned. And if anyone feels guilty and shamed and condemned in a relationship, then that's not coming from God. You know, it's only the enemy which will motivate with those things to try and make us feel bad about ourselves, and then try and do things to make amends, or do things in our own strength, or do things out of our own understanding, rather than trusting God. And to trust God means we trust him. You know, if we're sat on the throne of grace, then we have to rest in that place of his grace and allow him to work. You know, which does mean sometimes his ways are not the ways we would necessarily choose, but that's because he's God and we're not, you know. And the quicker we understand that, the easier it is to surrender and not try and be our own God, because that's what the DIY tree is. I am being my own DIY God. I'm choosing to do things in my own strength, in my own understanding, through my own abilities, in a humanistic way, rather than trusting in a relationship with God himself. And that's the whole point of that pathway. That's what it is. Everyone who's not operating from a relationship with God is doing it their own way. It just won't ever produce anything really fruitful. Which, it's sad when you see people go that way. That's the thing. It is sad when you watch people, I mean, imagine the sort of the prodigal son story, the whole thing, he wasted his inheritance. And it's sad to see our children and friends and people wasting inheritance, when they have a whole amazing destiny in God to fulfill. It's sad. And it can, in a sense, emotionally make us feel sad. But that doesn't mean that we should be motivated out of that sadness to act. We have to trust God in those things, which isn't easy. But as your testimony shares, you can have a supernatural way of engaging a situation, which means we don't have to feel guilty or shamed or condemned by those things, and we can still live in joy. Essentially, we need to rejoice always. That means we live in joy in every circumstance, whether they're negative circumstances or difficult circumstances with others in relationship. We still need to live from a place of joy, which is trusting God. That's what brings joy. The joy of the Lord is our strength. That joy comes from, I trust God and I'm going to keep my hands off this. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Just confirm what I'm experiencing at the moment, completely with my whole family. But yeah, it's challenging, but I also sense that God is with me. And I've just a small question. I have been praying a few times that I sensed that the Father is reading my scroll every day over me. Is that right? Or is there a reference also in the Bible which would confirm that?
Yeah, in a sense, a lot of people want to, see their scroll, know everything that's on their scroll, but essentially, I just want that my day to be written on my heart, to God to speak it over me, that then I will just begin to flow out of it. I don't need to know tomorrow. I have today. So I think our scroll gets unveiled day by day, and you could see it as, as a situation where he is speaking it over us and our spirit's receiving that and therefore flowing out of it, or he writes it on the tablets of our heart and we flow out of it. Lots of different ways of doing it, but it's a daily relational thing, not a fixed, it just happens type of thing. And certainly it isn't really there for us to see the whole thing and then try and figure it all out. How do we do it? I get fresh mercies every day. And I want to use up those mercies and the grace of God to do what I'm called to do today, not really fearing about whether I'll be able to do something tomorrow. So it all flows out of that. So, excellent. Okay. All right, I'll leave